We'll be doing the Festival of Light today, but I did want to read from our usual Rays of the One Light and Whispers from Eternity, if nothing else for completeness, so we don't miss this week and then wonder all about what spiritual lesson might have been given. It might have been the one that would have freed us from delusion. So this week, the title is called Self-Reliance versus Self-Reliance. Small s, self versus capital S, self. Although in this case, it's regular self versus italics, self. Let us all tune in with the divine italics. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. I'm sorry, could this be adjusted a little bit?
No.
Yeah. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Last week we considered the need for attunement with God, with the gurus, with the wisdom of others, until we make that wisdom our own. There is a strong and in fact valid belief nowadays in the need for standing on one's own feet, rather than depending weakly on others to carry us by their strength. Swami Kriyananda was once asked, "What is the best yoga posture?" "That one," he replied, "which sets you squarely on your own 2 feet." Our strength must come from within. If that strength comes from the ego, however, instead of from soul consciousness, it is like a guitar string without its sounding board. The notes it emits will be thin and feeble. Our strength must come from within, but must be coupled with recognition of our inner link with broader and higher realities. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, "Everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." Jesus, in talking with his disciples, emphasized also the power of attunement with his own consciousness as a ray of the divine. For this ray had descended already through him in response to their devotion. It was a sign that God was already, quote, listening to them with receptive attention and did not require to be wooed in that way any longer. In the passage preceding the one we read last week, Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman," meaning the one who harvests, I think, or the one who grows. "Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit," meaning he picks all the fruit so that more can grow. "Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." This was the meaning of Paramhansa Yogananda's counsel also, when speaking more intimately to the disciples of the need for attunement with him. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. This reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda, and this is related to the chant that we just sang. "The bee of my mind loves to drink from thy blue lotus feet." O Divine Mother, the bee of my mind is ever engrossed in thy lotus feet of blue light. It drinks the honey of thy motherly love. This bee will drink no other honey but that which is graced by thy perfume sweetness. O Divine Mother, flying over the gardens of my fancy, denying myself the honey of lesser pleasures, I have found at last the ambrosia buried in thy lotus heart. I have been thy busy bee. I have soared through the fields of many incarnations, breathing the airs of countless experiences. I will roam now no more. Thy fragrance has quenched at last the perfume thirst of my soul. I'm glad I read those. You see, why skip them? In fact, they're related to the Festival of Light. I wanted to just talk about this ceremony that Swamiji created, and then we'll go through it. It's actually a ceremony that's done every Sunday in America and in Europe. And here in India, we do it less frequently, but more regularly than we were originally doing it. In fact, reminds me, we're going to need the festival booklets at some point. We'll have them so that you can follow along, since there are a lot of words. In case you find it helpful, you can follow along the words in this booklet. On the other hand, if you know the words well enough, or if you can decipher our accents by now, I'm joking, then you can just take in the vibration of it and listen to it, whichever is your choice. Both, of course, are wonderful ways to participate. The reason I mention that is because, well, to back up, Swamiji created this ceremony, the Festival of Light, in 1987, thereabouts, 86 or 87. And he said it was something that he had been wanting to do for a long time. At that point, it was around the 20th anniversary of Ananda's existence. Next year, we celebrate the 50th anniversary. And in case you're paying careful attention to the numbers and the math and say, wait a minute, how is 87 the 20th? And that never mind. We'll talk about it some other time. But he said he had felt this need, he had this vision of creating such a ceremony, but it hadn't felt that the time was right until then. Now, why? Well, in the Festival of Light, and those of you who are familiar with it know how the whole story goes of the little bird and the description of these teachings and so on. And in fact, that's one of its purposes, that in any particular Sunday satsang, you're not going to have the entire scope of the teachings talked about in the reading, in the talk afterwards. And so, supposing, for example, the speaker speaks a lot about relationships, especially a new person may go away with the impression that, well, their teaching is about relationships and how to get along with others. And certainly that's a part of Master's teaching, but it didn't require 5 avatars to come down to earth to tell people how to get along with each other. And even so, we do the best we can, but we don't make a great job of it. So there's more to the teaching than that. So the Festival of Light, one of its purposes, or one thing that it accomplishes, is it conveys the entire scope of the teachings. But on the other hand, it does, why not just read out, we believe that, and so on, just a statement of the teachings? Because that would become tiresome to have to hear every single week, especially just a statement of this, copyright 2019, all rights reserved. It just become like a formula, or just a long sort of, speech statement. So Swamiji wrote it in a poetic way, in a lively way that, of course, includes music also. And so it's nice that way, nicer than a written statement that would just be read out. In addition, he said the inspiration of the service should not have to depend on the inspiration of the speaker that day. There should be a sort of stronger and more uniform foundation, because, it can sort of come and go. The other thing, though, and the most important thing, and one thing that I haven't really mentioned before, is that the purpose of the Sunday satsang is not only to instruct. In fact, it isn't primarily to instruct. It's not like a class. there may be similarities, but it isn't as if, as soon as we start having Sunday satsang with PowerPoint and bullets and this and that, we're getting in trouble here, because it's not a class. It's not something that the main purpose is to educate. Certainly there can be instruction, obviously, if you find something that's helpful. In fact, the purpose of Sunday satsang also can be, to an extent, to inspire. That's often the contrast that's given, not instruction, but inspiration. But it's even more than that, because as we know, ceremonies, especially ones that have survived through all the years, over many millennia, ceremonies have a particular power in and of themselves. They draw a blessing, and they also focalize our devotion. As you have the advantage of a ceremony is that it's something that you can learn, and then that hopefully has a power in and of itself, and that you can repeat over and over again, going deeper and deeper with it. That's, of course, up to each individual. We've all seen that the fire ceremony mantras, for example, can be repeated with devotion or without. They can be repeated with attention to what one is doing or without. Swamiji said he observed sometimes people in the middle of the fire ceremony, in the middle of Gayatri Mantra, saying, "Hey, Babu, bring some more wood," and then going back to it. I don't know how you say "bring some more wood" in Sanskrit, but they would throw that in, just interrupting the mantra. And he said he would see sometimes a priest performing a ceremony, just, checking his fingernails to see if they were clean while he was reciting something. Now, of course, Padre Pio, when he was a great Christian saint, when he performed the Mass, he would go into ecstasy. Sometimes it would take him hours to perform a ceremony that normally lasts about 30 minutes. So what would it be to be experiencing that inspiration? So in fact, one way to understand what we're trying to do here is we are reopening ourselves to receive the grace of God. You know the formula Master gave, that on the spiritual path, 25% is our effort, 25% is the Guru's effort on our behalf, and 50% is the grace of God. Now, we can sort of take that grace of God, 50%, for granted. Either that, well, I don't quite understand what that means or what to do about it, so I just hope that it's happening. Or that, well, God is busy running this whole universe, and I'm sure He's also sending His grace, just like sunshine and whatever, so I don't have to worry about it. Either way, it's taken care of. But in fact, as you might have heard Master say this in a recording, he says you should pray to God, saying 25% is my effort, 25% is the Guru's effort, and 50% is the grace of God, is your grace, he says to God. And then he says, God, your grace is everything. Why don't we pause for a second? Are we having a... Do you need money? For the cake? Yeah. Okay, we have it's July. Do we have a July birthday here? More than one? Two? Excellent. 3. Excellent. Okay. So, that again, God's grace, Master said, your grace, he says to God in this talk, is everything. And isn't that interesting? Because he gives the formula, say, well, no, you didn't say it's everything. But he, giving us the formula and claiming God's grace as 50%, says, your grace is everything. Now, why is that? Because really, without grace, we can't do anything. And that's what the reading was about, too, from the Bible. That Swamiji said, in some way, these avatars, when they descend, their only purpose really is to sort of part the clouds and draw a ray of God's grace down to earth for the devotees then to retrace and follow back up to heaven. It's sort of like Master comes down, opens the gates and says, run in, while the gates are still open. Of course, they stay open. But that's it. In other words, it isn't up to us to open the gate. It isn't up to us to understand what the gate's all about. It's only up to us to run. And so, we know our part to some extent. I'm supposed to be in tune. I'm supposed to hold the right attitude. And I'm supposed to develop these godly qualities in myself. And I'm supposed to smile. That's an important factor in all of this. Someone said to me recently, how will I know what desires I have that are not pure? And also what are materialistic, because I also want to develop professionally, but we're supposed to give up all desires, so how will I know if it's right? I said, look in the mirror and see if you are smiling. If you are not smiling, there's a problem. If you are smiling, it's fine. Now, I was aware that he could take that. Oh, great, I just bought 7 cars. I'm smiling. But you won't be smiling for long, especially once the income tax people find you. Or you just have to go try filling up 7 tanks of gas at the petrol station and so on. So, again, I knew that he had enough sense that he would feel whether this is true joy or not. But he was feeling so rigid about the path and so outwardly identified that if I behave this way outwardly, it's either spiritual or unspiritual. It's much more important, the attitude with which we do things. But we know this, or at least we've talked about it at length. When we know it fully, we'll be in God. But still, we are aware of this. What about the Guru's part? Well, the Guru has many things to offer us, but one thing he offers us is techniques. We don't just make up our meditation or just sort of gaze upward somewhere and hope that we're getting it right. We follow the specific techniques that he's taught us, because he said these will work faster than if you just make it up on your own. These, as he said, are scientific ways of finding God, as opposed to just unscientifically sitting in silence, hoping that something will happen. But even more important than the technique is God's grace. You see, in fact, the only purpose of the technique is to open us to God's grace. What is this grace? Again, Swamiji often gave the illustration of saying grace is like the sunshine on the sun shining on the side of a building. And unless the curtains of a window on that building are open, the light won't come in. The light wants to come in, and the light is there. Our job is to open the curtains. So, without the sunlight, though, in the middle of the night, you can open all the curtains you want, and you won't get anything. We need that grace to be there. And thus the reason for this ceremony. The Festival of Light helps us to open to God's grace and helps us to draw that grace to ourselves, also to the particular temple that it is performed in, the ceremony is performed in. What is a practical experience of this grace? Because I know it can be a little bit hard to talk about, really, it can only be felt. But what is a practical feeling of this grace or experience of this grace? What is it? Even as Swamiji said, you come, you feel good. That's it. You feel good. If you feel good, you feel that grace. But it's important to identify it as grace, as God's power. If we don't explain it, and if we're not aware of it, we can think, well, why do I feel good when I come to the place? Oh, I like the carpet. The carpet is soft, comfortable to sit on. You know, I should get a carpet at home. And maybe in the one room, you see? Or why does it feel nice? Well, the AC is set at a good temperature, and so I'll enjoy the coolness at this time of day. In other words, we won't know necessarily why we feel good. Even as disciples, even as Kriyabans, we can make the mistake of thinking that, oh, I feel good because when I practice these techniques, it calms me emotionally. And really what I'm doing is working with my emotions. Sure, that's part of it, but it's much more than that. Or, as I meditate, I grow spiritually, I have deeper intuition. Of course that's true too, but that's not what gives any of this its power. It is God's grace. And God's grace, we can say, yes, is shining everywhere uniformly, and that's true. But let us not also overlook the fact that these 5 avatars did come at this time to bring a new ray of light to earth. Not new, meaning completely different from anything in the past. As Master was asked by Swamiji, is your work a new religion? And Master said it is a new expression. A new expression, but as I said before, a new ray down, or if the ray is too abstract, a staircase. The masters have descended from heaven, and we just have to run up it. All we have to do is run. We don't have to build the staircase. We don't even have to know how many steps there are or where it goes exactly, and how, in fact, is the staircase coming from the clouds, or is it just go up the staircase? At the top, you'll find out all the answers. But it is crucial that we acknowledge that this grace has come into our lives, and that every time we feel good, we're also feeling God's grace. That's, again, our experience of it. Because otherwise it just God's grace is too far away, I could never feel it, I don't even know. I'm sure it's there, it has to be there, right? No. When you feel good, you feel it. And the other side of it is that when you feel God's grace, you know that this is what I'm experiencing. This is expressed well in something Swamiji wrote in the Festival of Light, and in fact, it was in the original version of the Festival of Light. It's not there now, and so when I found it, I thought it's always interesting to experience different versions of things that Swamiji went through in writing things. But this is the point I'm wanting to make. Swamiji wrote, as part of the ceremony, "To those who offer up the lesser light that is in them into the greater light of God, the light that was sent to earth through these saviors of mankind, the power of inner communion will be given, and the grace to know God. Such, O children of infinity, is the Lord's promise." So we'll now have the Festival of Light.